I was working for an online photo service, very profitable, but it had a problem. And that problem was the CEO. Our CEO was completely clueless. And I know this for a fact because I was the CEO.
In today's episode of Wicked Problems, I'm talking with Simon Wardley. I've known Simon for quite some years, and he's the inventor of something called Wardley Maps. Wardley Maps are a fantastic tool for helping you in many ways with your strategy. So they can help you validate your strategy, understand how robustly you've thought about it, but also really good for revealing how your industry is moving and where the emergent opportunities are and where perhaps you might not want to look. It's a collaboration tool. You use Wardley Map, you create that as a team, and it really helps drive the discussion and take the political rhetoric out of some of the discussions, because people get a method by which to agree, actually, this is the way that the industry is charting and this is the way we want to move with it. So it gets that kind of discussion really going. I've been doing them myself, using them myself with clients for quite some years now. And I have to say that they are excellent if you're trying to shorten down the time it takes to make sure that you really got a robust strategy that everybody's bought into. There's a number of links at the bottom of the show. I thoroughly recommend going to any of those and having a look and maybe trying Wardley Maps yourself. Simon is a frequent speaker on the conference circuit. If you get a chance, go along to one of his talks. They're very enlightening. I'm going to hand over now to the discussion between me and Simon around Wardley Mapping, and you can hear it from the horse's mouth, as it were. I hope you enjoy it. Welcome, Simon, to Wicked Problems. It's amazing that you've joined us, and I'm really excited to have this conversation.
It's my pleasure. It's been ages since we've actually talked. It's a delight to see you again. Now, of course, I'm somewhat different in terms of I've lost a bit of weight since the last time we've talked as well. But it is lovely to see you.
Lovely to see you as well. And yes, you've lost some weight, but I'm sure it's only physical. It's got nothing to. Your mental clout is still there.
Well, I'm smaller. I've been because my background. I've probably mentioned this in a past conversation. I'm a geneticist, biochemist by training. So I've been using some of my mapping skills to map the human body, and as a result of that, have been following a particular regime involving lots of changes to nutrition and to exercise, which is, and for me personally, has had quite a dramatic transformation. There you are. Mapping isn't just about running businesses and sovereignty and nation state competition. It can also be about the personal.
Well, in fact, why don't we start at the beginning then and say, because there will be people who watch this who probably, I know Wardley Mapping is very popular and it seems to be everywhere, but maybe there will be people who haven't come across it and don't completely understand what we're talking about. So why don't we just bring that to life just briefly, if that's all right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I totally agree. I mean, I live in a bit of I walk in fortunate circles with lots of other people who understand their landscapes and everything else, but it's not a topic which is widespread. It's still very niche. So where do you want me to start? The basics, the origin, how I got into it? Where do you want me to? A little bit about the origin, and maybe we can just explain to people, well, what is a map? What is a Wardley map? What is it? What is it? Okay. And why would I use one? The origin of the story is I was working for, this was back in 2004, 2005. I was working for an online photo service, which, had about 16 different lines of business, millions of users, very profitable, but it had a problem. And that problem was the CEO. And our CEO was completely clueless, didn't have any idea what they were doing. And I know this for a fact because I was the CEO. So I used to come up with these various vision statements of the future based upon nothing whatsoever. I ended up in a bookshop in Charing Cross, and I was talking to the bookseller. I was talked about all these books I'd read on strategy and how I created these vision statements and blah. And I really had no idea what I was doing. And she suggested that I read Sun Tzu's The Art of War. In fact, she was such a good bookseller, and these books are all translations. She sold me 2 different variations of the book, and I'm very grateful for that, because it was in reading the second version I noticed a particular pattern. So Sun Tzu talked about 5 factors that mattered in competition. 1, have a purpose and moral imperative. 2, understand your landscape. 3, understand the heavens, the climatic patterns, the weather, how the landscape is changing. 4, understand doctrine, principles of organization. Then 5, you're into gameplay, leadership. And I became really, really fascinated by this concept of landscape. How do you understand your landscape? Because we compete in territorial landscapes, geography, and we understand maps in that space. But we also compete over economic, social, political, legal, technological landscapes. So I became really fascinated by how do you map those landscapes? And that's what got me into mapping. Okay, so what is a map? Well, first of all, what is it not? It's not a graph. So I better explain the difference between a graph and a map and why I make this distinction. A graph is a diagram which normally has nodes and links. If you move one of the nodes, it doesn't change the meaning of the diagram. And examples of this are things like mind maps and business process maps and systems maps. You can take any one component, move it just slightly left or right, keep the links the same, it's still the same diagram. And those are graphs. Now, the distinction between that and a map is that if you move a little bit on a map, like if you move Australia and move it maybe slightly over towards the UK, that does change the meaning of the map. And the reason for this is because in a map, the space, the white space, the bits in between have meaning. It's actually physical space in the case of geographical maps. So I almost everything I had in business, which called itself a map, business maps, mind maps, process maps, they were all actually graphs. None of them were maps. And so I needed to find a way of mapping out my landscape. And there's 3 basic characteristics you need: anchor, position, and movement. Consistency of movement. So anchor, magnetic pole, position, this is north, south, east, or west of this, and consistency of movement, I'm going north, I'm going south. So how do you do that for business? So I started off by thinking, well, the anchor is the users. And the users could be the business. It could be the customers. It could be government regulators. All right, because you could have many anchors. So we'll start with those as the anchor. And I put those at the top of the page. And then I went, well, what do they need? So in the case of an online photo service, the business needed to sell prints. It needed people to use the website. The consumers needed to, well, hopefully order prints because they wanted prints back in those days when we used to print things out. And they wanted online image manipulation, whatever, online storage. But all of those components need needs as well. So you get through, operating systems, down to hardware, down to power. There's all components that make this the value chain, or supply chain, as we would call it. The distinction being a value chain is within an organization. A supply chain is across organizations. So you start with an anchor and you describe the position through a chain of needs, and that's a graph. Now you need to turn it into a map. Well, it turns out that each of these components, they're all forms of capital. It doesn't matter whether it's practices, data, knowledge, activities, any form of capability. It's a form of capital. And they all evolve through common stages: the genesis, first time something appears, custom-built examples, and then products, and then rental services, and then finally commodity utility services. So think about the radio, the appearance of the first radios, and then we used to have custom-built examples like crystal radio sets, and then products, and then it was my radio is better than your radio, whatever. And then eventually became a commodity. It just became a thing which is normally embedded in something else anyway. And so by simply going through your chain and asking the question, how evolved are these components, you can turn that into map. To which your question should be, so what? Why bother waste your time doing this? So those maps, I use for, simple things like project management methodologies. If you take any system and you map it out, the stuff on the left hand in the genesis, the custom built type area, you tend to use extreme programming, agile. Stuff on the right-hand side, more commodity, you use things like Six Sigma. Stuff in the middle, you use Lean. So you learn to use multiple methods. So it's, and it's true with finance and marketing. Like UK government, one project alone, we saved 450 million by simply mapping it out and applying the correct methodologies. It's useful for how you organize stuff. It's useful for contract analysis. It's also useful, you start to learn patterns, like everything's evolving. As things evolve, we have inertia. It enables higher order systems, and you learn to use it as a predictive tool. So I've done a lot of work over time using maps and weak signals, anticipating changes in industries for all sorts of different firms. You use it for organizing and structuring yourself. Once you have a map of a space, it becomes fairly easy to start identifying small teams that you should have building things, and also the change of attitude needed. So this leads on to a particular model known as explorers, villagers, town planners. So it's also useful for just generally having a conversation with people about what the hell we're doing and challenging each other in a way that stories are difficult. Because, unfortunately, we tell people that great leaders are great storytellers, which means when you challenge someone, you challenge their story, you're challenging their leadership, they get defensive. And one of the beauties is you put it on a map. You can just say, I think the map is wrong. And everybody's cool with that. So it's good for communication. It's good with alignment. It's good with methodologies. It's good for anticipation. It's good for organizational structure. And there's a whole bunch of other stuff, but really that's good enough.
I found it very good for situational awareness. So,
oh yeah, well, obviously,
you know where you sit in that industry that you're in versus, say, your competitors, and that gives you, in my experience, it gives people a really good idea of where to focus some of that that's going into the next quarter, say. And that's been a really powerful tool for people there.
You've been mapping for some time, though. And so the interesting thing about mapping, of course, I do scenario planning. We often take, we were looking at one particular group, looking at use of drones as how do you defend and how do you attack with drones? So you take on different roles, and we use the map as a way of scenario planning. We run through games and then rerun it as well, just to improve our ability to react to circumstances. So, and yes, you can use it for competitor analysis. You can use it. It's one of these things which people often ask me, how long does it take to get good at mapping? And I normally say about 9 years. The first 8 years and 10 months is going, I really should do some of that mapping. And the last 2 months is actually doing some of it. And then people say, yeah, but once you start, how long does it take to get good? And it depends on practice. It's not one of these things you can just learn from a book. I mean, I've always wanted the book, go from complete beginner to Jimi Hendrix in 24 hours on the guitar, but it doesn't exist. You have to practice. How have you found? I know you're supposed to be interviewing me, but I'm terrible at this. How have you found mapping?
Good question. How have I found it? So, what I found is in using it is that I have these. I think I've done really well, and then I'll have a sort of moment of clarity or a revelation, and I'll go. So, an early one. Let me tell you about an early one. So, I thought when I first used it, I thought, well, we have this map and it's lovely, and I know that that's Genesis and that's commoditized, and therefore I know we can have that discussion with the team about where do we concentrate our efforts next. Do we build versus do we buy, for example? Then I realized that hang on, I could actually on this map also plot where we want to be with certain things and where we don't want to be and why we don't want to be, right? So maybe something is actually more in the sort of commoditized scope, but we want to drag it back to the left and make it something that we are going to intentionally be bespoke, and we made that as a conscious decision, and that's allowed that conversation to happen, and then we can plot that, and then we can have that come up on let's say a presentation. Not that I'm great on presentations, but we have that come up on a presentation, then we can explain to C-suite, board, whoever it is, why we're doing that. And it might be because we're in a niche industry, and if we do that, we gain more control over that little bit of that industry, right? Equally, The other way round, we can map out, well, here's where we are, here's where we want to be, and we can map that onto the same. So I can put an arrow going, well, we're here, but we want to be there. Right, and that then gives some more richer information. So those are just two little awareness things that I had, and then the other one, and the other is that I think it's I started when I first started mapping, I would map it out, and I found that actually it's much more powerful. I get a team of people in who kind of know that, and they want to do stuff, and we just throw words up on a board, and then we start thinking, well, what are the important things that we've got here? At what level do we want to do this mapping? Because you can always drill down into ever more detail. And what that does, so you got your map at the end of it, which is great, but what you've done in the process of doing that is get ownership and buy-in. And it's really powerful for me, I think, as a tool for that. So those, and it's dissolved actually I didn't have arguments with people, but there were people in a business I was working with, and they were kind of at loggerheads about something. But it was when they saw it all on the map and they contributed to it, that went away. Because it dissipated, because then they realized that they were talking maybe about something sort of similar but in different ways, and it had just been more of a communications issue rather than and perhaps a little bit of misunderstanding around communications rather than actual argument. So that's how my development path has gone with it, let's say.
Most of your you'll have to remind me, you're mostly in finance, is that right?
I've worked mostly in capital markets, but also tangentially, quite involved way for the last few years in the EV market. So with charge operators and energy suppliers and payment processors and various others, although I still am also working in the finance sector. So they don't seem like obvious bedfellows, but they're both markets that hold at frightening speed, right? So
the finance sector is interesting. I've worked with various investment groups, some of which are focused on shorting industries. So they actually use the maps to work out which industries they think are going to have an interesting time, which is quite fun. I work with private equity firms as well. And so there's a lot of interest in terms of deal making, changes in relationships, what's going to happen as a result of various technological changes that are going on as well. So, that's been an interesting space. I certainly see the connection between the EV market space and the private investment space as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of equity
in
that market. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Any. What would you? God, I'm now doing the interview. I like this. Sorry, say again?
It's a whole new experience. Like, nobody ever interviews me. So.
Oh, absolutely. Well, it's lovely. It's lovely to chat like this. I mean, if there was one big lesson that you learned from mapping, and one also lesson for me, because I'm lousy sometimes at teaching this stuff and explaining. So one lesson for yourself that you thought was like, this is something mapping really, really stand out for me, and also one lesson for me in terms of how I should improve things.
How you should improve things, that's really difficult for me to say, because obviously your knowledge of this is going to be way deeper than mine, and there are going to be areas of your knowledge that I don't even know of. What has been stand out for me, it really helps inform the strategy conversations, right? Because so many people, I mean, I deal with people, with teams where we're using balanced scorecard, but the scorecard's not balanced, right? Or they haven't yet quite understood what their vision, mission, North Star, all that stuff is. They know that they're working in this industry, and maybe they're new to the industry. You think about the EV industry, there's not that many people who can say they're veterans, because it hasn't been around that long. I mean, you could say the first electric car was in the 1860s, but in reality, today's charge point operators, I mean, the earliest ones were in the mid noughties, and it's a really different game now. So a lot of the people that have gone into that industry are new to the industry, and I think it's brought a lot of, when I've used it with firms in that industry, it's really helped them understand, well, where do we sit in that ecosystem? What are our competitors doing? What is it? Where should we look next? Because sometimes people go and they think, oh, we should be doing everything all at once, because you can't do that. And so in a way, it helps you focus in on those areas that are really important now. And to your point that, maps are living, actually, I think you should, if you do a map today, you shouldn't be shy of doing a map in 3 months' time, see how the landscape's changed, or maybe it's in 6 months, or maybe it's a year, but whatever that cadence is for you, because it will give you that history of how things are changing, and it will show you patterns. And of course, we're pattern matching machines as much as anything else. And so I think it's very powerful in that way. I think not enough people have heard of it. When I often go in and I say, why don't we do some Wardley mapping? They say, what's that? And that's, I don't know. I don't, I think it's great, and I know lots of people do know about it, but that does happen. And maybe it's just these things take time, right, to permeate out. That's where I find myself.
So many good points there. First of all, on the time it takes, on average, it usually, when we're talking about management practices, it can take 30 to 50 years to spread. And so we're only 20 years in. So if it continues to grow, then, these things tend to be exponential. More and more people will hear about it. And hopefully, along the way, someone will make a better version, because that's the other thing about maps. Maps apply to maps itself. I mapped mapping, and of course, it's like anything else, it's evolving as well. So hopefully over time, someone will make better versions of it. We're nowhere near the Ordnance Survey maps of geography. We're much closer to the Babylonian clay tablets. We've got a bit of a way to go, but, someone will make a better version. Now, on that point about timing and change, maps are a snapshot. A friend of mine, Dave Snowden, does Cynefin, and Cynefin is a sense-making framework. And the way I like to think about maps is maps are a complicated view. They are a snapshot on a complex space. So if I think about them in terms of geographical spaces, tectonic plates are moving. So if you went back 200 million years ago, the entire world looks completely different. But, they're moving so slowly, we don't notice the fact that it's a really complex, dynamically changing environment. Yeah. Well, we notice those things. Yes, and that's perfectly true. But so your maps are a snapshot. Your atlas or your country map is a snapshot at a moment in time. And of course, if you go forward a few million years, that landscape will have changed, like if you go back a few million years. The only difference really between that and economic technological is the speed of movement of the tectonic plates is so much faster. So, compute goes from Z3 1943 to Amazon EC2 2006. It goes from Genesis to utility in the space of 60 years, not 200 million years, 60 years. So within your lifetime easily. And so that's what we see. We see these tectonic plates moving at much faster speeds, but it is all about maps are a snapshot. And one of the beauties about taking a snapshot is if you take multiple, even just with one, what we can do is what we call pre and post mortem. So pre-event challenge is where we, you obviously create a map and you challenge the map before you go and do something to make sure you're not doing things daft. And then post-event, we can do post-mortem analysis. So what we can do is we can say, this was the map. This is what we expected to happen. What did happen? And we can learn new patterns. And that's how I learn new climatic patterns, new principles of how we structure organizations, new forms of gameplay. And there's lots of those. And you can do that over multiple different sequences as well. So the fact that they are timely, i.e. they have a time, which is always why it's good to data map. The landscape will change. So you have to take multiple shots. As the landscape changes, you can actually use that to discover patterns and lessons. You can then take those patterns and apply them elsewhere to other maps.
There is a danger, I think, with any strategy system that people create a snapshot and then they think, well, it's done. And
we're done.
And then people say, what's the definition of done? Well, we're done. We've done it. No. You've done a version 1, let's say. It would be wise to say that there's no end version. So, we're going to go to version N, and we don't know what N is. It's infinity. It was a version with 8 on its side, right? And I think that's really important because otherwise people go, oh, well, we did that 3 years ago. Why aren't we doing it again? And the answer is because, well, guess what? The landscape in which you exist is changing, and it changes rapidly. And it changes even, with the advent of AI, for example, and it's not the only thing, but, it's changing faster and faster all the time. I do think that's a really important point.
So, well, there's two other important points which you've raised. The first one you mentioned earlier in terms of working with people, because the real value of the map is actually not the artifact, the map. The real value is in the process of creating it. So it's in the conversations that happen in the building of the map that the real value is actually generated. The map is simply the artifact, the output of that particular process. And so, yes, it's always a fascinating exercise, and it's to get other people, because they've all got bits and pieces of the puzzle. And they come out in that conversation. What we're doing is just consolidating on the map itself. The second thing is that the environment will change. And if you wanted to create a perfect map of Paris, right? Suppose you want a perfect map of Paris. The problem is, to be perfect, it would have to be 1-to-1 scale, which would be the size of Paris, which is no use to anyone. And the second problem is, as soon as you finish creating it, someone will have moved something, which means it would be out of date. So your issue with the map is, what people don't realize, or often don't realize, is a useful map by its very nature has to be imperfect. One of the things people worry about trying to create the perfect map, well, the answer is you can't. What you can do is create a useful and good enough map to cope with the uncertainty around you, and as a vehicle for communication. My favorite example, you'll often see squaddies doing this. If they're going into a building or whatever, they'll be outside. If it's pen and paper, it doesn't matter. If it's just sand, draw lines on sand with stones. They are not perfect representations of the building, but they are ways of communicating action between multiple different people.
Absolutely. I mean, even Google Maps or other maps are available, of course. But, a map on your phone will get you from, where you want to be to somebody else's house very adequately without it being a real representation. It's just some lines and squiggles on a screen, but it's going to do the job well. We talked about them being used in business. You actually, I think at the beginning of the call, mentioned you've used them with government. I think that's an interesting one, because often governments are the machinery of them is much slower than it is for businesses, because they're bogged down by a lot of sort of bureaucracy. But I'd love to learn a bit more about how, if that's okay, how that's been used and who's been using it in what kind of ways.
So I wrote something called I was one of the co-authors for a paper called the Better for Less paper, which was for Francis Maud. And this particular paper supported the creation of something which was called GDS, Government Digital Services, and also spend control as well. So this was back in 2009, 2010. So I worked with a number of people, Jerry Fishington, Mark Thompson, Liam Maxwell, and others. So I then went into, when the coalition got into power, I went to spend some time teaching various people in different government departments and different agencies how to map out that landscape, and also spent some time teaching people in spend control how to use it to challenge what people are doing. That quote, the 450 million, comes from Liam Maxwell's one particular government project. I mean, there are a number of different projects that I was involved in, challenging or helping people to challenge what it is they were doing. And I know there's a number of different departments. I've seen examples of mapping in things like the NHS, Food Standards Agency, DVLA. I did some mapping within there quite some time ago. So all sorts of different groups. So I didn't personally, I've never been a civil servant myself, but I also use maps not just in the technological economic space. We use them to look at things like sovereignty issues, particularly technological and economic sovereignty. And so I did some of that stuff with the DVLA, and actually I was asked recently to speak on some of that stuff at the Cabinet Office about a year ago. So there are small scatterings, but it's the same with industry, the same with large organizations. I often find there are small scatterings of mappers around. I'm always surprised because it's all open source, all Creative Commons. So anybody can use it. I get organizations come up to me and say, I was at a conference, it was last year. I was speaking at an event, and this group of people came up rather excitedly and said, "You're Simon Wardley?" And I went, yes, I am. And they said, "We love your mapping." And I said, "Oh, that's fantastic. That was so kind." And I asked them where they're from, and they said, "NASA." It was at that point I was like, "Oh my word." Because I'm a huge fan, God, they do rockets and things like that. Whoa. It's used in all sorts of places.
We are coming towards the end of our time here, which is sad because I think we could go on for quite a long time. But
ages.
Years and ages, as I think we have been known to do in the past. But if people want to learn more about mapping, either from the perspective of I'm a business and I want to understand how it might be useful to me as a business, or they want to learn how to do it, what are the first steps they should take, apart from just get on with it? Where should they go if they want to learn more about that and perhaps more about yourself?
Obviously, I have a book. It's actually an uncompleted book. It's all online, medium.com/Wardley Maps. You can also search online, Wardley Maps, and you'll find lots of sites like wardleymapping.com, wardleymaps.com. I think that's Chris Daniels over in Poland who runs that. Lovely chap, does lots of mapping. There's Learn Wardley Mapping, which is Ben, who's over in Canada. Again, lovely chap, does lots. So there's lots and lots of people, and there's lots of books. Susan Kaiser's book, Architecting for Flow, has lots of mapping. So it's spread. There's about 17 different books on it. You can always find me. I'm swardleymaps.com. I eventually bothered to put myself a website. You can just email me or find me on LinkedIn. Or there's this chap called Toby. You can just go find Toby and ask Toby, how do you map?
Simon, it's been really a great pleasure. Thank you so much. And maybe
it's a pleasure, delight.
If Wardley Mapping is wise to do on a semi-regular basis, maybe we could have you back in some months' time.
I'll be my pleasure, absolute pleasure. All right, you take care.